In the rehearsal today, I started talking, and there was like, then all of a sudden the chord played, and I was like, oh, a little delay in that. Hey, good morning again. It's great that you're here. If you're a guest, if you're online, if you're in the room, if you're in the atrium, welcome. Welcome to a church that cares deeply for people who feel spiritually disconnected or disenfranchised or who are deconstructing their faith. I'm Ryan. I'm the lead pastor here at Crossroads. My pronouns are he, him. I am a white, cisgender, heterosexual man born into a Christian family, which basically means I have benefited from all kinds of systems that have been built from the foundation of this country to favor people like me. But as a follower of Jesus, I believe that naming those privileges and leveraging them for others is the start of a life committed to the peacemaking path of Jesus, what Jesus often called the kingdom of heaven in our time. You know, Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and if you have a deep burden, come, take my yoke upon you, and you'll find rest for your souls." And unfortunately, modern religion, and by the word modern, I mean like modernity on, really from the start of religion, we can go into antiquity, really has not been a space of burden lifting. I don't know if you know that or not, but it's been a space of burden placing. And so we here at Crossroads are trying to be a different space. So whoever you are, however you have come here today, whether you are certain or whether you are skeptical, hopeful or hurting, you are welcome here. And I hope that you will join us as we walk together this peacemaking path of Jesus. Now, how many of you would like for me to talk for a few minutes and say something that's going to get me in trouble? Okay, because I'm going to do it whether you want to or not. Okay, this is the prelude to the service. All right, so somebody tell the children's ministry we might be here a little longer, okay? So I was online doom scrolling. Okay, and don't act like you don't do it. Don't judge me. Okay, and because I'm a pastor, the algorithms always send me like other pastor kind of things, right? Which are awesome. Okay, and so there's this one thing, and I don't know how. I haven't been on Instagram in like 20 years. Okay, I have an Instagram account. I don't know. I just never. And for some reason, I found myself on it. And my Instagram algorithm is totally different than any other algorithm. I was like, I'm a new person. Like, what is going on here? Like, if you don't think algorithms matter, like open up a brand new social media kind of feed, create a separate account that's like the complete opposite of who you are, click on 3 things that you want to buy that you would never buy, and you will be reborn. Like, you're just a totally different person. That's how algorithms work, okay? Now, so I'm watching this, and for whatever reason, now I'm getting everything on Instagram, and I'm just now realizing why I'm getting it, but I'm getting everything on Instagram that's like church conference-y kind of stuff, like a little throw up in your mouthy kind of stuff, okay? And I used to put these on, so it's fair game. I mean, I totally get it. But here's the thing, this one, I don't know what it was, but it was this, I think he was a pastor, I don't know. He looked like me, white, bald, muscles, tattoos. 2 out of 4 is not bad, okay? I'll let you decide which 2 I have and which 2 I don't have. Okay, and it was the most startling example of how the foolishness of white male grievance has entered into church world, okay? So there's a phrase for you right there that will get you uninvited from a lot of seats that I used to sit in and tables that I used to be at. White male grievance, not a popular word, okay? Phrase. But here's what this person said. This person said to all these church leaders, the reason why the men in your church aren't volunteering is because you don't have volunteer opportunities for them. I mean, come on. And he started talking about the state that he lived in. I won't mention it, Oklahoma. And he says, how many of y'all are from Oklahoma? Raise your hand up nice and high. They say it's a real place. I don't know. I've never been there. So he starts talking about how, and then he starts going on about chainsaws and tornadoes, and I don't know. I don't know. But then he literally said this on record. He said, I mean, come on. We're not going to hold babies. Yeah, like in the nursery. I know, right? We're not going to hold babies. So here's the deal. I need all the men in this church to sign up for once a week to go hold a baby in the nursery. And stop acting like because you're a white man, everything needs to be catered to you because for the first time in your existence, life isn't about you. That's, probably not the best fundraising strategy, right, Chris? Chris is sitting there like, I know the budget. Like, what is going on? Why is he saying this stuff? Like that's the deal though, right? It seems subtle and like it feels good, like, oh, our churches should have all these opportunities. But here was just this toxic, masculine, white dude frustrated because the world wasn't catering to his demographic. And it was shocking to me. And it was sad and it grieved me. And I thought to myself, I'm so grateful to get to be a part of this community. And I'm not joking around. On the back of your Connect card, men, if you identify as a man in here today, make a commitment to 1 year to go hold babies for 1 year, one time a month. It's 12 Sundays. Will you do that? 12 Sundays. So we can show the world that you actually can do beautiful things as white men without having to have the world cater to you. And holding babies and creating children's ministries that says we're ending a generation of religious trauma that teaches our kids doctrines that destroy their self-worth. Like, we need everybody involved in that, but just specifically to the white men today, okay? I noticed y'all got quiet. The white men got quiet, got real quiet. But I want to challenge you to do it. All right, fair enough, you won't, but that's okay. All right, now, should we go on to the doc? Now, I also have to say this. Inside the program is my cell phone. Probably not a good way to lead into this. Not going to get a whole lot of white men texting me to go have coffee, I think, this week. But hey, listen, if you're a guest, if you're newer and we've never had the chance to have coffee or whiskey or whatever it might be, my cell phone number's in that program. It's on the website. Text me. Let's get together. I'd love to hear your story, share a bit of mine, all of our crazy journeys, answer any questions you have about our church. It'd be wonderful. And here's what I want to say to you. Please, 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 please. If you send me a text message and 24 hours later I have not responded, resend the text. Something happened and I didn't get it. This week I got a message from someone who was really hurt and they sent me a very vulnerable email, which was wonderful. And because I met this person here and they had sent me an email and I hadn't heard back from them. And so I just sent a message saying, hey, I wanted to check in, see how you were settling in, if there's anything I can do for you. And they were like, I was really surprised to get your text because I texted you sometimes to get together and you didn't say anything to me and nobody talked to me at church. And so I've just kind of moved on. And it was a very fair assessment. And I'm just heartbroken and super sad, and I apologize profusely, but I can promise you, if you send me a text, I will text you back. Just something happened. I missed it. And that does happen sometimes. So please, 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 if you do send me a text message and I don't respond within 24 hours, send it again, okay? And I will do my best. It is my real number. Okay. You want to close in prayer? Do the offering? Call it a day? I noticed none of the white men running out to sign up for the nursery, so I didn't, at any rate. Simon, it's good to see you back, brother. We're glad you're back. We've been praying for your family, and I hope your trip was wonderful, and we know you'll be back up here leading and singing, so it's good to see you. We missed Simon up here today. Not that everybody was wonderful. We just missed Simon. All right. We're in our series, Rethink. Now, all that came off my time. Holy moly. Why did you start my timer? Okay, so... Most of us, if we're honest in the room, how's that for a transition? Raise your hand up if you've ever had a feeling. Good, that's called enrolling the room in public speaking, by the way. Most of us have had feelings, emotions, and most of us, if we're honest, we pretty much trust them. How many of you trust your emotions? You trust your feelings at some point in time? Raise your hand up nice and high, right? How many of you have ever said, I just feel it in my gut? I have a friend who we talk about like trading stocks and options together, and he's always like, well, I got my gut. Like, okay, well, that'll be interesting to see how that works out for you, right? And we always joke around about that. We have these thoughts, right? Well, if it feels true, it must be true. Brooke gave a great talk a few weeks ago where we talked about this idea that we get these scripture verses that say, don't trust your heart is deceitful, and how that's been used to control the way in which we think, right? And so we go, well, I can trust myself, but I want to kind of give you the other side of that coin. That yes, you can trust yourself. There's no doubt about it. But I want to talk today about this idea of our emotions. And we do trust them, right? If we feel afraid, what do we assume? I'm in danger. If we feel a sense of worthless, we assume we don't matter. Spiritually, if we feel abandoned, maybe we assume that the divine spirit has just kind of walked away from us. And it makes sense that we make these correlations and these connections because feelings are powerful. They color everything in our lives, how we see the world, how we treat others, how we understand ourselves. There's a woman, a neuroscientist named Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she explains that emotions are not hardwired truth signals. Emotions are constructions of our brain. And get this, our emotions are constructions of the brain using our past experiences, our context, and the stories that we carry with us. In other words, our feelings are often the truth of our history, but not necessarily the truth of the moment we find ourselves in. How many of y'all have a history? How many of you are like, oh, I'm with somebody with a history? Right? We all carry that history with us. Now, Brene Brown talks about this idea of our emotions and how they tell a story, right, from our past. And she talks about how when there's gaps in our experiences, when we see something happening around us and we're not exactly sure what it is, we tend to fill those gaps with negative stories. Y'all ever texted a friend and they don't text back right away and you saw the little read, whatever they call it. I know they read it. They must be mad at me. Right? We have this gap in the story. Or maybe a coworker looks distracted in a meeting and we think, how disrespectful. They don't respect me. Or maybe you're having this feeling of insecurity or rejection. And when we have those feelings, a story gets written before the facts are in. We just assume somebody's talking about us. We assume they're angry at us. We assume these things. We fill in the step. We fill in the gap. Now, here's the thing. Our emotions, right? Our emotions act as the authors of those false narratives, right? Our emotions tend to drive that. These fictions that we create. And these fictions, at the end of the day, they shape us. They shape the way we see one another, the way we understand ourselves, and even God. Now, here's the thing. Don't hear this correctly. Hear this correctly. That was a weird pause. I said, don't hear this correctly. So don't misunderstand me. Hear this correctly is what I said in my brain, but it's not what I said with my words, okay? Feelings are not fiction, okay? That's not what I'm saying at all. Your feelings aren't fiction. But our feelings, they really do write fantastic fiction. Right? They write fantastic fiction. And if we never pause to question those feelings, to just explore them, they'll harden into beliefs. And then those beliefs start driving the bus. Here we go. Down the highway of destroying every relationship, of every good thing in my life. And this bus that our emotions start driving takes us right down to the street of guilt, takes us right down to the street of shame, takes us right down to this place of despair. See, feelings are real. They are real because they are real experiences of our body and mind. But real doesn't always mean reliable. It doesn't always mean reliable. Now, this is a human experience, and believe it or not, our scriptures in our tradition are filled with all kinds of human experiences, especially the ones that we know very well. And so we can look at our scriptures oftentimes and they'll hold them up to us like a mirror, and we can see ourselves in them. We can see our feelings, our emotions, our understandings of God that we get right sometimes, our understandings of God that we don't get right, our struggles, they all show up in our spiritual ancestors. And one of the stories that I want to talk about today speaks directly to this issue of our feelings acting like fiction writers. And I want to talk about this great story that if you grew up in church, you probably heard about, Jonah and the great fish, or the Jonah and the whale. How many of you have ever heard this story before? If you haven't heard this story, you're doing all right in life, I promise, okay? All right. Now, here's the thing. I got to say this. I don't think the power of this story comes from it needing to be literally factual, okay? So me personally, don't think this story is like history. I think it's truth, okay? I think it's a story that teaches us. And I think the power of this story, why it lasts so long, is that it speaks to deep human truths through metaphor and parable. Now, if you're not familiar with the story, here's the short version. A guy named Jonah is a prophet, a mouthpiece for God. He's told to go to a place called Nineveh, but he hates Nineveh because Nineveh is the capital of Assyria, which are the arch enemies of the Israelites at the time. And he's told to go, and he's supposed to preach, and he's supposed to tell them that they need to change or their society is going to be destroyed or whatever. And Jonah doesn't want to do it, so he goes the other way and he runs away from Nineveh. He runs away from the opportunity. He gets on this boat, a storm comes, he blames himself for the storm. He tells the sailors that are on the ship, this is my fault, it's my problem, I'm disobeying God, throw me overboard. They're like, we're not gonna throw you overboard. They start rowing harder, trying to figure it out. They can't figure it out. He says, I'm seriously, you gotta throw me overboard. So they throw him overboard. Big old fish comes, swallows him up, he ends up in a big fish, sits in the fish for a while, is spewed out of the fish, decides to go to Nineveh. Not a bad idea. Goes to Nineveh, is wildly successful in his journey there. The whole city changes, becomes this space of love and Smurfs. It's beautiful. And then Jonah that's where the Smurfs came from, by the way. Jonah gets angry that that actually worked. Is this why I didn't want to go, God? Because I knew you were slow to anger and I knew that you were merciful. And look at them, they're all happy now. And so, this is really the point of the whole story. God raises up this little tree that provides shade for Jonah because he's crying because it's so hot outside. And then the tree shrivels up and Jonah gets mad and he kicks the dust at the tree. And God says, are you frustrated and angry that the tree died? He says, yeah. He says, well, think about me. I created all these citizens of this great city. Shouldn't I be concerned for them too? And it just ends there. We don't really know if Jonah got it or not. And it's this beautiful picture of universal divine love, okay? That's the story. You with me? I mean, that's the story more or less. If you can read it yourself, it's in Jonah. First half of the Christian scripture, also known as the Hebrew Bible, okay? So today I want to focus on this moment in time where he's in the belly of the great fish, the whale, okay? It wasn't a whale, it's called a fish, I get it. Everybody wants to fact check me all the time, all right? So he's in this great fish, and there's a prayer that Jonah prays. And I want to talk about the prayer because the prayer directly speaks to the idea of emotion. And it speaks to this idea that our emotions are real and they're genuine, but they're not reliable. Now, one thing you should know about this prayer, right? Because we want to be readers of the scriptures as adults, that in the history of the text, most scholars think that this prayer was inserted into the story in a later time to help us understand the emotions of Jonah. So don't think of this as Jonah had a pen and paper in the whale that somehow survived, and he just wrote it down. And this is amazing, I'm just journaling to God right now in my flower journal, This is an addition into the story, right? To help people understand what was going on in his mind, in his heart, in the midst of all of this, which was meant to help us understand what goes on in our hearts, in our minds, in our experiences when we're going through things that are difficult, particularly maybe when we're called to act in ways that we don't want to, that are full of justice and full of mercy. And so in chapter 2, Jonah prays from inside the fish this psalm-like prayer. Okay, now I'm not going to read the whole thing, but we're going to look at a couple of things in this prayer. Right now, the first thing I want you to see is that in this prayer, Jonah, right, his feelings created his thought that God had cast him into the sea. His feelings created a thought that it was God that cast him into the sea. This is what he says in verse 2. He says, I called to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried. Sheol is the Hebrew concept of the abode of the dead. It is neither heaven nor hell. It is just where the dead people go, okay? He says, that's where I cried out, and you heard my voice. And then he says this, you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Jonah's feelings are raw in this moment. He feels distress, he feels overwhelmed, he feels abandoned, he feels powerless. But here's something really, really important in the story. If you go back to chapter 1, you'll see that God never told the sailors to throw Jonah overboard. I mean, that was Jonah's idea. Nowhere. It was an idea that was born out of fear and despair, and he decided in that moment, God must be punishing me. And if I'm gone, if I'm off this boat, then everybody else will be safe. Now, do you see it? Do you see the emotions, right? How his emotions wrote that story? The storm is what? Is God's wrath, God's punishment. There's a gap that's being filled in. I'm the problem. Now, I know what some of you are saying. Some of you are like, Ryan, I got you. I got you. I've been reading my Bible, and I know for a fact that when they throw Jonah overboard, the storm stopped. What do you got to say about that? What do you got to say about, Ryan, you can say God didn't say, but it worked. It worked. Okay, now, I'll give it to you. That is what happens in the story. And on one hand, it is a detail that the narrator gives us. But on the other hand, we have to recognize that it reflects a worldview of Jonah's time. And what was that worldview? That disaster and suffering, especially natural disasters and suffering, they came from the hands of the gods. If there was no rain, it was because the gods withheld rain. If there was a flood, it was because the gods were angry. If there was something, right, there was this idea that if we have not pleased the gods, then life is going bad for us. And that was the worldview. Now, last week, if you were around, we talked about this worldview, and it goes way, way back. That just world bias, remember us talking about that? Anybody? I know you slept since last week. Just world bias, that's just world bias right there. So we have to ask the question, who is writing the story? And how are they interpreting what happened? How are they presenting the story that's consistent with the worldview in which they live that might be inconsistent with the worldview and with what we know today? Now, it's entirely possible that the storm calming was understood by those who wrote the story, by Jonah's community, by the people who are reading this as God's judgment. Even though, what is the larger story about? It's a revelation of a God of compassion and persistence and mercy. And this really is a mirror for us, right? That just like Jonah, when life feels all stormy, when things go wrong, when things go bad, when our emotions kick in, we write this story, God must be punishing me. I deserve this, I'm the problem. But that's not necessarily the truth of how the Spirit of love works. That's our fears and our shame writing really believable fiction. Okay? Now, another thing that we see here that's really important is that Jonah's feelings, right? Not only did they just write fiction, but they wrote a tragic fiction. How many of you like a good tragedy? You know, if you've ever watched the show Billions, most people don't understand if you've watched the show Billions, it is a modern tragedy. It's why you're frustrated every single season, because these people cannot get out of their own way. No matter how hard they try to do what is right or try to do something ethical or something moral, you're cheering for them, but they just can't get out of their way. It's a tragedy. And that's what Jonah is writing. That's what his emotions are writing. In Jonah chapter 2, verse 4, he says, "Then I said, I am driven away from your spirit. How shall I ever look again upon your holy temple?" See, this is Jonah's core thought. This is the story that his feelings wrote. I am driven away from your sight. I'll never again see your holy temple. The temple was the epicenter of God's presence. I'll never be there again. But here's the thing. That's not what God said. That's not what God did. That's what Jonah's emotions told him. And so there's this shift that takes place, right? His feelings were real, but they were writing a false narrative. It's that same thing that I talked about earlier with Brene Brown and all her research, that we fill in the gap with fear and with shame. They must be talking about me. We have no idea. But we fill in those gaps. And we do it all the time. We do it with the text message. We do it with the friend. We do it with the anxiety you might be feeling at work. You have to go and give a presentation. And you get all anxious and your story becomes inside your head, I'm going to bomb this. I'm a fraud. It all starts to kick in. You walk into church, somebody you know doesn't greet you, and the story goes, oh, they're mad at me. They don't like me. I don't belong here. The feelings are real, but the story they write, not always true. And so Jonah shows us what happens when we make this mistake, right? When we allow our feelings to write the fiction and we replace those feelings with the truth of reality. And here's what's really powerful. Jonah, his feelings didn't just describe his pain, they actually built a prison that held him. His emotions created a prison. Look what he says. He says, the waters closed in over me. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head at the roots of the mountains. Listen to what it says. I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever. Like those emotions created this space, this imprisonment. And so his feelings of fear and abandonment, they hardened into this thought, God has left me. God doesn't care about me. And then it shaped a belief, I'm cut off forever. And what were the consequences of that belief? Despair. I mean, the language is there. The waters are closed in on me. The weeds wrapped around my head. The bars are on me forever. This is the language of finality. Like, Jonah isn't just describing his emotions. He's letting his emotions define reality. And that's the danger for you and I. That's the danger of our emotions. When our feelings start to write the story unchecked, they don't just color the moment, they lock us into this journey, into this path that will lead to despair. And it's a spiral that many of us know all too well. Think of it like this. I feel like a failure. I must be a failure. I'll never be anything but a failure. I feel lonely. I must be unlovable. I will always be alone. Like the truth is, our emotions are terrible fortune tellers. They're terrible prophets, but they are powerful storytellers. But they don't always tell a story that leads us to life. And Jonah shows us. He shows us that the cost of trusting these feelings uncritically, trusting them as ultimate truth, it just brings us to despair and resignation. And missing the beauty and the power of grace. But here's what's amazing. It's in this silence, in this moment in the story, that the divine Spirit helped Jonah rethink his feelings. During this prayer, God never speaks in the story. Never speaks to Jonah during this prayer while he's in the fish. That doesn't happen. God doesn't say a single word. The whole prayer is Jonah's. It's raw, it's desperate, it's the truth of his feelings, but it is shaped more by fear than truth. God doesn't interrupt in this story. Love doesn't correct. Love doesn't lecture him. The Spirit of love does what? Responds with silence and presence. Silence and presence. Sound familiar? Last week, God's not in the fire. God's not in the whirlwind. God's not in all that noise. It's the silence. But God does speak to the fish in the story. And so the fish spews Jonah out on the dry land. And just like Elijah in the cave, the Spirit of love doesn't show up in the thunder, in the fire, or in the words, but in quiet, life-giving action. Because the fish isn't punishment. The fish is provision. What else was God supposed to do when the guy decides to be thrown overboard? The fish wasn't punishment. God's like, what are you doing, Jonah? It's just a storm. I had nothing to do with that. Relax. Oh, now I got to find a fish. Oh my gosh. I'm helping this guy out. He thinks I'm destroying his life. He thinks I'm sending him. He thinks that I've entombed him. I have put him in a womb. I'm caring for him. And the silence of the divine turned that fish, not a tomb, but a womb for him, where he could stop and breathe and reframe his feelings. And that reframe becomes clear. His feelings are screaming, I'm abandoned. And the silence whispers back, you're held. Might smell a little bit, but you're held. So here's what I don't want us to miss as we think about our feelings and their ability to write really powerful fiction, is that resilience doesn't come from believing everything we feel, but from trusting love is in everything we feel. Right? Resilience in our lives. Actually, the opposite happens. When we start believing everything we feel, it will fight against resilience because we'll start telling all those narratives. But if we will trust that love, the divine, is present with us in everything we feel, no matter how silent it seems, resiliency can build. And so in your everyday normal life, How do we think about this? Because it's one thing to come to church and to hear this and go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But when you're in the heat of the emotion, how many of y'all ever said something dumb? Okay, let's ask this question. How many of you, a person, maybe a spouse you're still with today, or at some other point in time has said something dumb in their emotions? Yeah, it's a little easier to point a finger. I totally get it. Don't worry about it. So what do we do in our everyday normal lives? How do we deal with this? Well, Susan David is a psychologist on the faculty of Harvard Medical School. She's a leading voice in emotional health. And in 2016, she published this really great best-selling book called Emotional Agility. Get unstuck, embrace change, and thrive in work and life. If you're interested in the book, one of your next steps is you can read it. If you check the box, we'll send you a link so you can get it. So this book has been praised by Harvard Business Review, the Washington, all kinds of spaces, right? And she gave a TED Talk on it. It has 10 million views. Amazing. Now the central idea is this. Emotions are data, not directives. Emotions are data, not directives. We don't need to obey them, but we need to notice them. We need to name them, and we need to learn from them. And we need to practice what she calls emotional agility to help us avoid getting stuck in these false narratives. And then we can live with greater resilience and greater purpose and greater compassion. So here's 4 things we can do real quick. Number 1, she says, name, don't numb. We'll call it name the storm. We got to name it. Jonah blamed himself for the storm, but naming what actually is happening really doesn't matter, right? David, in her book, she says, we get stuck when we fuse with our emotions. I am angry. I am worthless. But the healthier move is to name it as an experience. I'm noticing I'm getting angry. That's very different. I'm noticing I'm sad. See, naming that storm, naming that reality doesn't make it vanish, but it does remind you that you aren't the storm. You don't have to be defined by that. You come home after a long day, your teenager snaps at you. I know that is a far-fetched thing to imagine happening. Their hormones are all out of balance. You're all tired. They snap at you. You're like, oh, I'm so angry. And so you fuse your whole identity. I fuse my whole identity into that emotion. But if I can pause and I can say, oh, I'm noticing anger in me. First of all, it's a lot easier when I say it than somebody else says it to me, right? Wow, I'm this experience. So suddenly I'm not just the storm. I'm not the anger. But I'm a person standing in the middle of it. So there's anger floating all around me, and I have a choice to make about how I'm going to respond. Second thing she says is step out. Don't get stuck. We'll say this, throw yourself overboard, okay? Now, I know in the story, he throws himself overboard. He probably shouldn't have done it, but I got to make it somewhat memorable. So throw yourself overboard. Jonah literally throws himself into the sea. But metaphorically, this is about stepping outside of our feelings long enough to just create a little space. An amazing quote, one of the most amazing quotes of human history, in my humble opinion, came from Viktor Frankl. If you don't know who Viktor Frankl is, he's a survivor of the Holocaust, psychologist who survived the camps. And he talked about hope in the midst of that experience. And this is what he says, if there was ever a voice to listen to on the power of choosing and the understanding of that gap. He says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Stimulus, response, what happens in between is the choice. That pause. It's about how to disrupt the emotional lie and to ask the question, is this emotion bringing truth? Is it telling me a story of truth in this moment? Or is it just echoing my history? Is it just come to steal, to kill, and to destroy me and my relationships? See how I threw that in there? A little Bible verse, but not about a real deviled horn figure. But you've got thoughts that are just there to steal and to kill and destroy. You know the deep truth of that that's grounded in an ancient way of thinking about good and evil. Is this really do this? So Jonah pauses in the fish and it becomes that space. So when that text comes from the friend, hit the pause button, right? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? And don't send the second text. Just, you got a choice. Is this really about right now, or is this just about my history of feeling rejected? Is that talking? Is my insecurity talking? Is my past talking? And that pause will keep you from letting that single feeling create this false story. All right, next thing she says to do is you've got to walk your why. I would say you got to walk out of the fish. You got to walk out of the fish. Jonah didn't stay inside the fish forever, thank God. That would not have been a fun way to finish off life, right? He was spit up and walked out onto dry land, called again to live into his values and the opportunity that was in front of him. Emotional agility means we don't act from fear or anger or despair, but we act from our values. And for us as peacemakers, that means we choose to walk in compassion and love and courage, even when our feelings scream otherwise. And when we walk our way, we aren't denying our emotions. It's not that they're not real, but we're letting love, the divine spirit, lead the way. That's what we're doing. And so our why becomes really powerful, and it can dictate how we respond in those circumstances. And we talk about this here as a church. Our why guides us. Our values guide us. Not our need for more people, not our need for bigger giving, not our need to fulfill some measure of what it means to be a successful church by American evangelical standards. We're guided by our values. And we can talk about all day long what that has cost this church over its 25 years of existence. Or we can say what it's afforded this church for its 25 years of existence. And we can talk about every one of your stories that are here right now, that are being blended together into something powerful and beautiful, because we're not living into fear. Where are we going to be? What are we going to do? But we're living into the why. And that is so, so powerful. And it makes us a better church. It makes you a better person. It makes the world a better place. When values take the lead, our thoughts begin to change. The way I think about God, the way I think about you, the way I think about others. And if I let my distorted my distorted feelings run the show, I start saying things like, oh, I'm a failure. If I were to let my feelings as a pastor run the show, if I'm just being real vulnerable and honest over the last 6 years of my career, it would be really easy for me to say, I'm just a failure. I'm just a failure. Ryan, you went from people wanting to know your wisdom. You went from people wanting to know how to grow churches. You went from people, you were invited to tables. You were invited to seats. People used to wait to talk to you. That's what I was saying. It'd be real easy to let that script play in my head. But when I'm anchored in my values, and when you're anchored in your values, we can reframe and we can say, I'm learning. And we can say the world is complex and people are complex, and it's hard and it's difficult, but it's worth engaging from my values. And it doesn't mean that I don't feel anger. It doesn't mean that you don't feel anger or sadness. It just means I'm not going to become those emotions. Instead, I'm going to become, you're going to become, our church is going to continue to be a place marked by love and resiliency and trustworthiness. Here's the thing. I believe this to my very core. And I hope that as we navigate what is next for our church, whatever that looks like, however that is, that you will recognize this, that I will recognize this for us as individuals and for our church, that feelings write fiction, but values write legacies. If I let my feelings drive the ship, it's just a fiction of what is actually transforming and changing and making a difference. But values write legacies that last, that inspire others. So as we have communion this morning, what is it that God's inviting you into? This week, don't just rethink your feelings here at church or listening to this. Take a next step. Watch a TED Talk, grab a book, listen to a podcast, have a conversation with a friend, do something, because feelings are powerful, but they're not always accurate. And learning to rethink them is one of the ways we step into the freedom the Spirit of love invites us into. So on the back of your Connect card, there's some next steps. If you check the box and turn that in, we'll send you links. You can watch Lisa Fieldman Barrett's TED Talk, You Aren't at the Mercy of Your Emotions. We'll send you the link. If you really want to dig in, go ahead and read Emotional Agility by Dr. Susan David. Maybe you're like, whoa, those are big commitments, Ryan. So just take it calm. down. Here's what I would encourage you to do. All throughout this week, just capture this breath prayer. Write it somewhere. Make it a screensaver on your phone. Do something, but just bring this question to your heart and to your mind. Spirit of love, help me honor my feelings without letting them define my truth. So we're going to sing a song today. Everybody's welcome to the table. No class to take, nothing like that. And this song really does speak to this idea that love is writing a better story than your emotions ever could. This song is called I'll Give Thanks. And it has a lyric in it that really speaks to what I think can arrest our emotions before they take over our thoughts. This is what it says. It says, every breath I breathe is an invitation to believe you are creating something good. I always replace you with love, to believe love is creating something good. Though this season doesn't tell my story, the fish, the whole thing, whatever, it doesn't tell my story. I know love will move mountains for me. Why? Because love is just that good. And so this song, this moment for you is an invitation to trust that love is writing a legacy in you. Even when your emotions want to write a fiction, maybe even a horror fiction this time of year, that holds you back from healing and resiliency and joy. I invite you to stand, sing this song with us, receive communion, the body of Christ broken for you, the blood of Christ shed for you. Everyone is welcome to the table to experience the mystery of this divine love.